Thank you so much, Ajay, for coming once again on TeqTalk. Really a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Jess. Great to be back here again and good to again talk about some of our favorite topics.
Before we actually go ahead and deep dive into today's topic, tell me a little bit about your initiatives.
Sure. I would say probably I'm still very much deeply plugged into all things AI at Salesforce. The larger shift of focus has been more around how do we really get the go to market and adoption up and running for a lot of our customers because what's happened is over the last 36 months or so of the Agentforce or the agentic journey at Salesforce, we've really been successful in getting a lot of customers on board the platform. But then beyond that first use case, we're really looking at how do we scale up them. And that's where most of my time is going on, go to market and adoption driving.
Great, very interesting. And today's topic, I know it's core to your heart. It is AI, memory, and the stacks around it.
Right.
So, Ajay, the entire field of agent memory rests on one sentence. It's the first principle of the paper Koala out of Princeton. And here it is. They say that language models are stateless. They do not persist anything across calls. You prompt the model, it answers it, it forgets. The next call again starts from zero. So the model never remembers anything, it forgets. So agent is what it adds memory around the model. Memory was never a property of model. It's always the architecture, what we build around it. Does that match what you see when any company says that we want to have AI to have memory? Do they realize they are actually asking you to build the whole system around the model that forgets?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail with it on that topic. One of the definitely the more mature conversations happening right now is how do you really make AI systems remember everything that you've been talking to them and so on. So memory is almost assumed comes as a part of the model offering. People often tend to relate it to what they see on their left pane or the right hand side pane of the chat history in ChatGPT or Claude, but that's not what it is. It's much more. It's much more than the memory associated with the enterprise requirements. So think of this as like an enterprise agent as like somebody that you hire in a company. Let's call them as a chief of staff or a human executive. A memory that they can remember when you're talking to them, which is a current sentence. Of course, think of this chief of staff carrying like a notepad for today's meeting. And then they would also have probably recall memories of some of the past meetings in their head. They also come from a domain knowledge. Somebody is in banking, somebody is manufacturing. As a chief of staff, there is a certain operating procedure. And then there is, of course, all the knowledge associated with that company that's stored somewhere. So what happens with an enterprise AI memory stack is simply these layers that is to be seen around this. And most of our customers, when they come to a brand like Salesforce, they almost imagine Salesforce would provide these layers to them without actually looking at this as multiple layers. They assume that AI systems or agents almost offer these layers. And that's typically where we'll have to peel the layers of the onion one by one. And that's typically what really opens up the more memory conversation.
So in this conversation, we are going to touch on two things. One is context and the other one is memory around it. So let's start with our pillar one, which is context. I want to be clear, disagree with it, but context is not the memory. A lot of people blur this. Context is simply what AI can see at the exact moment. So your question, your goal, whatever we have handed it for one task. So context to me is attention. Memory is what it stays behind after AI fades away or looks away. It stays a bit. And also there is a famous Stanford study from 2023 that is called as Lost in the Middle.
Yes.
That says that they found that if you put something important information in the middle of a long context, the AI's accuracy drops more than 30%. I'm talking about 2023, and even in 2026, this has not changed much. The concept is still there. It's something called as context rot. So
Yeah.
stuffing more than actually needed can really make AI worse. So what do you think about it? What context is, and what do you think are the disadvantages of having more context?
Sure. You simplified the definition of context there. So the origins of context was basically
Hmm.
because, as you said, LLMs were starting off to be as
Hmm.
stateless functions. We'll talk about where LLMs are heading. Will they have memory in the future and all of that later? But LLMs are, as of today, even still today, are mostly stateless, right? They do
Hmm.
not remember anything between the raw API calls. What is context window is the active working space where
Hmm.
computation really happens between you asking a query and think it is exactly what it is. It is the attention head, it is the prompts that get formatted, and it is the cache that hits the LLM.
Hmm.
And that is exactly what context window or active context is. Now, if you move away from the topic of context window, which is where once it has actually come back from the model in terms of the response, uh, you'll probably need to look at the other layers of memory, which I think we'll get into the discussions of.
Yeah.
And context is probably, I would say, tip of the iceberg.
So I say that context is a budget, not a bucket. You shouldn't just fill it with a lot of data. What is your take on this lost in the middle?
What you brought up there is very interesting, and it sort of is relevant to the adoption journey that we are seeing at Salesforce and many other companies also today. But to the point of what has really happened, context windows, if you look at the last 24 months,
Yeah.
36 months, have expanded into millions,
Yeah.
billions of tokens, right? The bigger context doesn't necessarily mean one thing: better reasoning. Never.
Right.
Bigger context is never better reasoning. That is one definition I would almost put as like a textbook heading chapter. And as you rightly said, larger contexts often suffer from the lost in the middle phenomenon, which is exactly what the
Hmm.
Stanford paper highlighted about. But there is also very much the other things that people don't talk about is the highest latencies and cost of exponential repeated prompts, right? So
Hmm.
just to get to the more accuracy level, you probably continue to stuff more prompts into the context window and try to get more out of it. So from an operating best practices perspective, I think not just us at Salesforce, but also the whole world probably
Hmm.
realized that context, similar to language, has
Hmm.
always has to be very optimized. You
Right.
can convey the same thing in a line, you can convey it in 10 lines, a paragraph, but it's about what you want to get out of that message or communication.
Hmm.
And one thing that we'll always have to remember is these models are going to use the context, vectorize it, and then convert it back into embeddings. And embeddings are going to go back into what people call back as the spatial models, and then try to find, oh, this text means this, hence the reference could be this. So it's still going to be still very probabilistic. It's
Hmm.
not deterministic. So
Yeah.
the more deterministic you want it to be, the better context or the better formatted context. So there are tons of best practices that companies try to put in. I know everybody's trying to optimize their prompts, but over the period of 1.5 years, everybody's realized, let's put more deterministic controls
Hmm.
closer to the execution workflow, and that will naturally smoothen out the context curve. If somebody is bloating up a context, the deterministic layering that you will build around your workflows will pull the bloat down. And I think a company like Salesforce has already implemented this in terms of the agent script, for example. Others outside are still thinking about it, how to do
Hmm.
this. As a result of which, whenever I talk to customers who are not yet using Salesforce Agentforce, probably still struggling with um, accuracy levels. They
Hmm.
still feel there's a lot of hallucination, after
Yeah.
which they realize, oh, maybe we need to give up on this project because it's not really adding value, but they don't realize that they're messing up the context itself.